These past few weeks, in building up to today's feast day of St. Simon and Jude, we were encouraging parishioners to bring old paraphernalia into to our church so that we could have it out there for people to see in the gym. And so all kinds of trinkets and things, the old ashtrays. Everybody used to smoke all the time at the beginning. You smoked everywhere. So there's ashtrays and T-shirts and hats and things like that. And also, there's different uniforms, the basketball uniforms, cheerleading uniforms, there's banners and all kinds of different things from St. Simon and Jude. And it's really neat to see these pictures of the foundation of the church when it was first started. And when you look at this one image of Father Kuhler, who's the first priest, he was the first pastor here, this picture's taken basically almost where we are, just a little bit behind this church, it looks like. And he's got a shovel. He's got these 2 or 3 little boys who are just smiling faces. One's got dirty knees. And then there's these well-dressed people. They look very dapper. They look like from the 1920s, just this dapper looking, it's a solemn occasion, but they're digging dirt, it's just like, it's kind of cool. At any rate, as you look at it, and then there's the white sign, which says St. Simon and Jude Catholic Church. And then there's these trees. And in the background of these trees, I thought, well, geez, they didn't really do a good job with this photo. It just looks really gray and dull. And it looks like even if you could have had color, you wouldn't have seen color. It looked all black and gray and a little bit of white, which is how I see my life, so it's fine for me because I'm colorblind. But so that I was asking somebody about this picture, I'm like, geez, I guess the cameras just obviously don't have the digital capacity that we have today. And they said, no, that's the way Pittsburgh was. It was just full of soot and, kind of like, well, not as bad as, not like today, but actually worse than today. And it wasn't because it was raining. It was because of all the pollution, I guess. But what was so cool is to see emerging from the gray and from the weeds and the trees and the darkness was this bright white sign with a pastor and children and different families there. And you could say, wow, that's kind of a neat image of how, at the beginning of time when out of chaos, God calls forth light and people and human beings. And it's kind of what's happened in this parish. And when you look through the history and you see the different priests who led the community as pastors, you can't help but be grateful for Father Kuhler for taking this church on his back literally and getting it started with families and friends in this community who perhaps some of you knew or are a part of. And what's so beautiful about that is that this community really was a family of families centered on Christ, bringing his light, bringing his life and love to a world that does go gray sometimes on us. He also drove the school bus, so you could see him driving school buses around, and he's the one who's responsible for bringing these 12 nuns from Ireland over too, and that's where the house where I live now. And so you could see right from the beginning how Father Kuhler tried to be kind of that bus driver. Everybody kind of on the bus with him, headed in a beautiful direction at St. Simon Jude. Then obviously after him you have an Irishman named Father Carey, who his goal in life was to die praying the rosary at the moment of Christmas mystery, the mystery of the rosary, the incarnation. Apparently he achieved that goal, plus he had his army boots on. So you can't really blame him for anything other than trying to do what he felt from God to do. Obviously he had his wonderful quirks that people really either enjoyed or didn't enjoy. He was kind of a character who was very direct and had no problems telling you what he thought. This morning I came in late to 7:30 Mass, and I know he would have called me out from heaven for coming in late. He had no problems with calling people for coming in late or leaving early. He didn't do the sign of the peace because he called people birds, because people would flip each other the bird in the parking lot, so he felt that wasn't a good way to do things. But what Father Carey truly brought was a man who was truly zealous for his faith and his church. I'm honored to be able to have his military suitcase in which he used to go around and give last rites to our soldiers, celebrate Mass on the battlefields. They're still blood-stained and just full of history, and being able to celebrate Mass on our mission trips with the special linens and chalice that he left is truly a blessing and a grace. He's somebody who the very gym that we have here is named after. After Father Carey was Father Ward, and one of the things that Father Ward I see so often is that he left me more books that I could ever look at, let alone read in my whole entire life, in our rectory over there. And Father Ward, as most of you who were here during Father Ward's tenure, was a great preacher. He had a great sense of history and the world around him, and really was able to bring preaching and the gift of his knowledge and wisdom to us. He just lives down the street now. He's in an okay health situation, has his moments. So it's beautiful to be able to lean on him every once in a while and to be able to thank him for what he did here. Then we had Father Bradley. Father Bradley is like John Paul I. He just had a brief period here. If you don't know your history of the popes, John Paul I was basically about a month-long pope, sandwiched in between Paul VI and John Paul II, well, St. John Paul II and Blessed Paul VI. Father Bradley lived a very brief time, and it was really hard to find pictures of Father Bradley. First of all, because he was here such a brief time, and second of all, because he didn't like being in pictures. So we found one or two, but they were tough to come by. But one of the things that's it's kind of funny that Father Bradley left was in the rectory. There's this beautiful grandfather clock, and when I got here, I was trying to figure out whose it was and why it was there and all this stuff. And it was his sister's, and they left it here. And they asked his sister when Father Bradley died, "Would you like to take and she's like, "No, I think it should stay there." So I think it was kind of a message to me that I need to remain on time. But the problem is it's broken, and so it only works twice a day at 11 o'clock. So I usually don't miss my 11 o'clock appointments because of it. But Father Bradley was a very prayerful man, and somebody whose books and some of his things you can still find around probably and even in our library there. Then there's Father Dan Maurer. Father Dan Maurer being a priest after my own heart in terms of he loves riding bikes, he's athletic, he loves sports. He's a man who's pretty young in terms of his age and all that. But he was a man who got purified, and definitely a time here as a priest was one of the more purifying and trying times of St. Simon and Jude, as he had to watch the school close. I would suggest that my brief knowledge of history here that it truly wasn't because of Father Dan that they had to close the school. There was a lot of other reasons. But one of the things that Father Dan left me was an ability to be able to build the church with a lot of the enthusiasm and things that we've been doing here over these last 5 years. And it definitely needs sometimes, if you look back at it, those who are willing to just get purified in the fire in order to be able to build things. And it's a lot like the pine cone in California that needs burned sometimes by a forest fire in order to grow some of the great and biggest trees in the world. And I'm very grateful for Father Maurer, because when I got here, it made things a lot easier to just be able to start and revive what we're doing here in our church. And one of the things that happened early on in the time that I've been here was to really try to craft and create and come up with a way to inspire myself and each one of you to love Jesus Christ. And so early on we turned to, actually it's kind of part of the liturgy this morning, this passage from Ephesians chapter 2, in which right before what we got this morning, it says, "God, who is rich in mercy, out of great love with which he loved us, made us alive together with Christ." And what you see in the first reading here is just a continuation, a couple of verses beyond that. And, as our dear bishop's calling us to a church alive, I think we all experience that we're not going to have a church alive unless we're alive with Jesus Christ. And so it is that St. Simon and Jude, in the chapter in which we're living, is calling and challenging each of us, especially in this year of discipleship, to have the courage to actually take the risk to listen to Jesus Christ, to take the risk to spend 5-10 minutes in silence, to do nothing but just to listen to Jesus Christ in prayer. And that's why I felt it was so important. It's been such a blessing to see Eucharistic adoration on Tuesdays, our holy hours, and wanted to offer a gift to the Church of St. Simon and Jude, a special Holy Family Eucharistic Chapel, which is in our Parish Life Center, a place in which we can come and pray for our marriages, pray for our children, pray for our grandparents, pray for our family. And I hope that becomes a way in which we can continue to listen to Jesus Christ. And also by a community in which is striving to inspire ourselves to love and to be alive with Christ, how can we not be his disciples? And one of the great things is what's going on at the preschool. We call them the little disciples. And it's these little 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds. They're just getting beyond diaper age. But boy, they have such a heart for Christ. It's as if you can see the innocence of their eyes and their hearts as they light up to talk about their guardian angel, or they light up to talk about the story of creation. And it's so beautiful to watch them go into the little chapel down there and pray and even lead their parents and family to come and to pray. And so we have about 182 of those little disciples down there, bringing people closer to Jesus just because of their closeness with Jesus. It reminds you of that phrase of let the children come to me. But in the end, what I think is so obvious is that listening and learning will hopefully lead us to a greater love of Jesus Christ, experienced in his scripture, experienced in his sacraments, experienced in the charity and the mission that we all can have by giving our gifts generously to our neighbors. And I feel so convinced that, when you read these readings this morning, it is so obvious that, as St. Paul says, that Jesus Christ himself as the capstone or the cornerstone. And you start to realize that what does a cornerstone do for like the Jerusalem temple when they would have built the Jerusalem temple? Or what does a cornerstone do, especially back in their days, in order to build something? The cornerstone was the first stone that was placed. And from that cornerstone, everything was constructed around it. It served as the square to line up the rest of the sculpture of what would go above it, what would go to the right of it, what would go to the left of it, of what would go below it. It was which the structure rested on. And it was the one immovable piece. Everything else could be moved around in order to line up with the cornerstone. And so I guess my invitation today, and my invitation to myself and to each of us at St. Simon and Jude, is, do we allow Jesus Christ to be the cornerstone of our lives? When we move to the right and to the left in our cars, when we walk up and down our rooms in our house, when we move to the different ways in which we relate to other people, is it Jesus Christ who is aligning us with those people who we care most about, for those people who we probably don't care too much about, for those people who we don't even know anything about? Because if Jesus Christ is the cornerstone of our lives, then everything else will line up from him and head back to him. If the disciples, and especially our boys, Simon and Jude, teach us anything, that especially if you look at the life of St. Jude and what he's known for, the legacy, as he looked, acted, spoke, and did everything the way Jesus did, that some people thought he was Jesus, to the point where he had to carry a picture around that Jesus miraculously put on him so that they knew he wasn't Jesus. This is Jesus. And with that strength and closeness to Christ, everything he did aligned with Christ. And so perhaps today's a good day if we ask ourselves, if we line up with the great cornerstone who is Jesus Christ, so as to be able to listen, learn, and love him in our lives and in our community.